My perspective in addressing academic imperialism, therefore, is to go back to the mechanisms that are at work within the higher education system. The subject is viewed, in other words, from my perspective, from it's an inside academy perspective, not the outside, the conventional outside perspective, purporting or assuming certain external sources or causes for the phenomena under investigation. The academy, of course, the higher education institutes, the academy, of course, could be playing in the hands of real or imagined grand institutions or programs that our previous speakers mostly talked about, those outside influences or colonial influences. The academy, from my perspective, could be playing in the hands of real or imagined grand institutions or programs with dehumanizing and alienating interests, consciously or unconsciously. And thus, this inside perspective could be linked to the outside view. Disclosure of the traces of outside influences, however, is not my intention here. This is due to my lack of expertise in the colonial, so-called colonial perspective, which I don't quarrel with, but it's not my area of expertise, and for the very reason that I'm an educational theorist by profession. Therefore, I would like to address the question, which I believe is a by assuming a sociological perspective, and to be more accurate, a psychosocial or psychocultural perspective in dealing with what actually transpires in higher education systems to make higher education or academia reaching the stage that it has reached, and leading to the certain undesirable qualities that I just mentioned in the graduates. I will be concentrating, therefore, in other words, on the hidden aspect of what actually transpires in the university, not the publicly endorsed explicit policies, programs, and actions carried out. I'm talking about the hidden curriculum of higher education systems, in other words. What is naturally being experienced by those who attend university, the students I'm talking about, I'm most concerned with, the apparently common experience or the lived experience, which can only be detected by removing the skin and looking farther to the educational setting, which requires a so-called intelligent or enlightened eye. The problem that I'm addressing, of course, is most relevant to social sciences, and I agree with previous speakers that this is really the circle or the sphere where the problem is more acute, most acute. Since cognitive and dispositional qualities such as initiation, reflection, or the yearn for detecting truth beyond what has been labeled as such, and surprise, the element of surprise, are rightly thought to be the discriminating attributes of studenting in these fields, i.e. social sciences. So by this introduction, I would like now to discuss with you what happens in higher education institutions that would justify the term imperialism of academia. How would that imperialistic practice take place, and how would that go? How is it institutionalized in the institution of higher education? In other words, the pitfalls of the institution, what has become to be known as more or less the prevalent and ubiquitous functions of the institutes called university. That's That's the how of this prevalence or of this dominance of practices that leads to the nurturance or preparation of graduates with those debilitating qualities that I mentioned is the focus of my attention. The suggestion is, my position is, that higher education culture, the cultures that pervade higher education institutions, enjoys more similarities to a repressive and encapsulating culture than an empowering or an emancipating culture. So let me start by addressing the main issues and the main points that I have in mind in disclosing and revealing what is going on and what is being transpired in the education system in institutes called universities. The first part, I will address my points and I will try to delineate and explain to you what I mean by the repressive culture by addressing 2 points and pinpointing 2 aspects. One has to do with substantive aspect of higher education, and the other one I have labeled the dispositional aspect of higher education. The substantive aspect of higher education, of course, has to do with the content, with the knowledge, and with the accumulated knowledge that is being transmitted or that is being conveyed to the new generation. How are we going with the business? How are the higher education system and the universities are going with the business of transmitting the accumulated knowledge to the students is the substantial aspect, is what I refer to as the substantial aspect. There are hidden mechanisms in transferring the accumulated knowledge, is what I'm saying, that would lead to those debilitating qualities that I started with. Explanation of these hidden mechanisms with respect to the substantive aspect of what transpires in higher education systems is the delegitimation of what I refer to after Joe Quintello as post-formal knowledge. Post-formal knowledge is a social political account of cognition and learning, which was coined, the very term was coined by Joe Quintello, as I mentioned. It's a cultural view on learning and cognition. What I'm saying is that post-formal knowledge is a null aspect of the curriculum that is being taught, that is being offered at higher education institutions. The post-formal is the null aspect of the curriculum, is what is sacrificed at the feet of formal knowledge. The formal knowledge is known as the fixed and the final manifestation of human knowledge. As if knowledge is written in ink, so to speak, in textbooks, and that it cannot therefore be changed or rewritten. Paradoxically, universities have been created, we would assume, to serve as the central institution in modern societies to handle the knowledge production or to stimulate further knowledge production and knowledge revision and reproduction. What I'm saying, in other words, is that in our higher education institutions nowadays, with respect to the substantive aspect or the curriculum, the academic aspect, the so-called academic aspect, is regarded as much more important than the intellectual. And by that I mean that the students are being encouraged to behave as mere receptors and to adopt a receptionist attitude towards accumulated knowledge or taking knowledge product as for granted. The main point that I would like to stress that this is the main fault in the internal mechanisms of our higher education system with respect to curriculum and with respect to teaching and learning. This is as if knowledge products are globalized. And as I mentioned, within the sphere of social sciences, this is the most faulty assumption that one can assume. The other aspect is the hegemony of scientific or empirical method. This is, by that I mean that our higher education system, in addition to the taken for granted attitude that it encourages and stimulates in the students with respect to knowledge products, it also stimulates a taken for granted approach to the knowledge production process, Or in other words, our universities, knowingly or unknowingly, are sort of monopolizing understanding and meaning making by saying that true meaning and true understanding would come only through a scientific process. This I would regard as an epistemic violence going on in our higher education system. Part two of my discussion, since my time is running out, part two of my discussion, or part two of the mechanisms, the internal mechanisms so prevalent in higher education system, I regard, or I have labeled as dispositional aspects of higher education. In contrast to the substantive aspect which had to do with the curriculum, the dispositional aspect has to do with the sort of dispositions that we nurture in our education system, in our higher education systems, in the students. And that disposition, of course, is non-reflective trust. Why should reflection and criticism be a rare phenomenon in higher education? Why is the unconditional trust to the text and its bearers so pervasive an event in higher education? These are the questions that I think we need to ponder upon. Why students are robbed from qualities like inquisitiveness, tolerance of ambiguity, that there is only one right answer to every question, and that right answer is the answer written in the text. So there would be no tolerance for ambiguity. So how about the quality of serendipity? How about the quality of social sense-making and curiosity? They are all being marginalized, I would submit, in return for what they gain in formal learning transactions taking place in academia. And that is in return for respect and grades and credentials. Why should formalism, in other words, or conformity be the name of the game in higher education? This is the most undesirable disposition that we could inculcate or that we could nurture in our students. The proposition is not to eradicate trust, of course, from the face of higher education. It is to break the binary trust versus no trust mode and to opt for a third option called reflective trust, as I just mentioned. The hidden curriculum, again, with respect to this dispositional aspect of what transpires in higher education, elicits game-playing behaviors, or as Philip Jackson refers to it, as, and leads to what Philip Jackson refers to as docile scholars, which is an oxymoronic phrase. So I would sort of try to go to my final stage and my final part with, in the last minutes that is remained from my time by telling you that what I think needs to be done. What I think needs to be done. What is the strategy to counteract the current situation and the existing situation? I have come up with a theory, a modest theory called question-oriented theory to education. And question-oriented theory to education submits that the value of an educated person, be it a university graduate for our discussion, the material value of a graduate student, of an educated person, or otherwise, is ultimately determined not by his or her quantity of knowns, but by the quality of his or her unknowns. Not the quantity of what he knows, but the quality of what he doesn't know, and the questions that are present in his or her mind. There are very demanding and uneasy ramifications and implications if a higher education system would intend to carry out a question-oriented theory of education as its doctrine. I would have liked to go through some of these implications and ramifications, but I think that I have to comply with the order of the chair of the panel, and I stop at this point. I would be more than happy to go through those implications if time permits in the next round. Thank you.